What's up guys, I'm Brad Rodriguez from Fix This Build That. Today I'm going to show you how to make a truss console table. It's got straightforward construction, the reclaimed top and the truss detail really add a ton of character. Stay tuned, I'll show you just how I did it. I wanted to make the design and construction of the console table very attainable and easy to make, so I used dimensional lumber for the base. You can make this whole table with just a miter saw, a pocket hole jig, and a drill. But I'm going to show you some ways that I used other tools to get what I think is a better look. I started by making the base for the table, and that meant cutting a lot of parts on the miter saw. I cut the legs from 4x4s, and I used 2x4s for the rest of the base. I cut the apron and the lower stretcher pieces to final size, but I left the parts for the truss detail a little long so that I could cut them to length later. One of the things I don't like about 2x4s is the rounded corners. It leaves gaps when the boards are joined together, and it's just not as clean as I'd like it to be. An easy way to fix this is to cut the boards down on the table saw, taking a 1/4 inch off of each side of the board. This leaves you with a 3-inch wide board with square corners. I set my table saw to 3 1/4 inches, and I ran all the boards through on one side. Then I set the fence to 3 inches and ran them all through again. This little detail might not seem like much, but I tell you, it makes a world of difference in the final product. To assemble the base, I drilled pocket holes in the short and long apron parts that will hold the top. I also went ahead and cut some slots into the top apron with a biscuit joiner. The slots will hold the tabletop fasteners that I got from Rockler to secure the top. I started by building the sides of the tables. I flipped the legs upside down, and then I glued and screwed the short apron parts to the center of each leg. I'll attach the lower side stretchers between the legs after I've positioned the truss detail. I attached the front and back aprons to one side, again centering the apron on the table leg. And since I couldn't clamp the aprons to the leg directly, I clamped the aprons to the table and then put a block behind the leg to keep it from moving backwards. I installed a support bracket between the front and back aprons. The bracket will tie in the truss detail later and is mounted flush to the bottom of the aprons. The legs and the apron for the base are all done. Now what I'm going to do is add in the truss feature. So this is the design that I'm really excited about. So underneath the table, there's going to be this triangular design of the truss. So I got to do some miter cutting. I left things long so I can cut it to size on the miter saw. I'm going to start doing some measuring and start attaching this all together. This is going to be pretty sweet. I really am digging this design. To start assembling the truss, I drilled pocket holes in both the vertical riser and the inner supports. I attached the riser to the center of the lower stretcher, and now I can start cutting the angled outer supports of the truss. I set my miter saw to 50 degrees and I cut one end of each support. I lined up the support and then I marked where it needed to make the next cut, but I had to get the right angle first. I cut a 50-degree angle on a scrap piece and then I moved the saw to about 40 degrees and cut the other side. I did a test fit here and there was a small gap in between the riser and the test piece, so I adjusted the saw, cut the scrap again, and got it dialed in right. When you cut the outer supports to size, it's better to make the first cut just a little long. Then you can go back and adjust your mark or your stop accordingly and get that perfect fit. Anytime I'm doing something with angles, I do a couple test cuts and I make sure I can sneak up on the right length. I used a Forstner bit to drill holes in the lower stretcher to attach the supports. These bits leave a nice clean hole and I use blue tape to mark the right depth for my screws. I'll leave a link below to a Forstner set from Rockler. I really love these bits. I glued the joints, clamped the support in place, and then I secured the screws into each one. Then I clamped the tops of the supports to the center riser and drilled and secured each of those with more 2.5-inch screws in the counterboard holes. The last part of the truss is the inner supports. To get the right lengths for these, I butted the square ends up against the outer supports and marked where those met the center riser. Now thanks to geometry, this angle is going to be the same as the last one that I cut for the outer supports, so I just left the saw set up at the same angle and made my cuts on each of the inner supports. I drilled holes in the lower stretcher just like before, and I secured the miter ends of the support from underneath. Then I secured the other end with pocket screws to finish the assembly. The back side of the truss with all the pocket holes won't be seen, but I went ahead and filled all the holes with 3/8-inch dowels. This is my favorite method for filling pocket holes, as the glue dries quickly and you can cut all the plugs with a flush trim saw and sand it down smooth with minimal, if any, filling needed. I flipped the table base upside down on my workbench and I laid out where the truss should be mounted. The reason I didn't attach the lower side stretchers first was to make sure that there was a flush fit between all those lower pieces. I clamped and screwed the truss assembly into place, and then I clamped the side stretchers flush. With the side stretchers in place, I removed the truss assembly so I can install the pocket screws. I put 4 screws into each side and then I plugged them with dowels as well. One thing I realized a little late here was that when I installed all 4 plugs at the same time, I couldn't fit my flush trim saw in there. So instead, I just pared them away with a chisel, which was actually quite satisfying. On the other side, I installed 2 plugs, cut them flush, and then installed the other 2. I sanded all the plugs flush and then I screwed the truss assembly back into the top and secured it to the side stretchers, and it came out with a perfect flush fit. The last thing I did to the base was plug any remaining pocket holes and then give the whole base a good sanding at 80 and 150 grit. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think this truss feature is looking great. The base is done. I'm going to move on to the top. These are some reclaimed joists I actually got out of a house out of East Nashville. These are Douglas fir and they have some amazing character. They're about 70, 80 years old. I'm going to run these through and mill them up and try to keep as much character as I can because they just look really awesome. But there's a lot of twist to them, so we'll see how it goes. I'm really excited. This top's going to look great. To keep as much character as possible on these reclaimed boards, I decided to only plane one side of each board and leave the other face gritty. I chose the flattest face on each board and then ran them through the planer with that side facing down. I ran all the boards through until I got down to new wood across the entire surface of the underside of all 3 of them. I took them to the joiner next and I referenced that flat face against the fence and then I jointed one straight edge on each board. I wanted to leave the character on the outer edges of the outside boards as well, so I only cut a second straight edge on the center board over at the table saw. If you don't have access to accident woods or reclaimed wood like this, or if you don't have a joiner and a planer, you can always use 3 2x6s or 2x8s with the edges ripped off to make this top. To glue up the top, I didn't use any biscuits or dowels, just wood glue. I used a silicone brush to put the glue on the lower 3/4 of each board to try to avoid glue squeeze out on the top. These brushes are great for getting the glue just where you want it. The joint is over 2 inches thick, so I wasn't really worried if there wasn't glue all the way to the top of the joint. There was still some twist in all the boards too, so I used a little gentle persuasion to get all those seams as close as possible. After the glue was dry, I cut the top to length using a circular saw and an edge guide. My regular shop vac hose didn't fit my saw, so I switched over to the universal small port hose from Rockler. The rubber boot fit right on there and it helped cut way down on the sawdust cloud. In hindsight though, I should have used that flat bottom surface to reference the saw for a smoother cut. Here's the other part that I always get asked about. To keep the character but be prepped for finish, I do a light sanding with 80 grit. I'm just trying to expose new wood here on the top, but still see all that grime and the gouges and the saw marks. Then I come back with 150 grit to get everything smooth to the touch. I used water-based polyurethane to do the finish on the top, and I put on 2 strong coats with a chip brush. For the base, I painted it a medium gray with a satin latex enamel. I put on 2 or 3 coats depending upon where it looked like it needed it. I attached the top with some tabletop fasteners, and the console table was all wrapped up. I want to give a big thank you to Rockler Woodworking and Hardware for being a supporter of Fix This Build That. You can see the links down below in the description to all the Rockler items I used in the video today. If you want to build your own truss console table, there's also a link down below to my website. It's got the plans and all the materials and supplies that you need to make this for yourself. If you're not subscribed already to the channel, I'd love to have you as part of the team. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and until next time guys, get out there and build something awesome.